Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to share with you my memorable decks from 2022. So this was a video that I did last year that I thought would be fun to revisit again this year. I'm not going to go back through the decks that I talked about in last year's video because it is very year specific. But one of the things that I like to do is to kind of take a moment and talk about and look at and have a moment of appreciation for the decks that I kind of had a moment with. So these are the decks that I call memorable decks. They're not necessarily my most used decks for the year. These are decks that I had either a specific use for, practice with, or decks that really just found a very unique place in my collection, or that, as I kind of like to say, I had a moment with it, right? It was something memorable about the experience of working with the deck. So again, it's not necessarily my most used decks or even my favorite decks, although several decks in this category will be favorites of mine. What we're really looking at is decks that made an impression on me. So we're going to start things off with the Wildwood Tarot, and that is because I did, for most of the year, a year in the Wildwood, and I followed along with this book, and I used this copy of the Wildwood. How funny, the Fool is on top. So this is a practice that I, to be perfectly honest, dipped in and out of throughout the year. I started the year really strong with it, as we tend to do, right? And then I ended up kind of just dipping in and out. I tried to stay on track because it goes through the Wildwood Tarot according to dates. So the King of Arrows is in the time of February 1st through the 26th. The Two of Bows is in the time of May 10th through the 18th. So I did try to keep pretty consistent. I started off journaling all of this, and then what I ended up doing is pretty much just pulling out the book, reading the dates for whatever time period I was in, and then looking at the individual cards, and then I was sometimes doing some additional readings with it. Now, those are not practices that I actually journaled much about. I just kind of worked with it, did my readings, read the entries in the book, and then looked through the cards. Because I wanted to get to know this deck. It does have its own system. I can read it in my own way, particularly because I read more numerologically most of the time, a little less RWS, although that is, of course, flavored into my reading style. This actually works pretty well for me because I feel like it is a bit more tied into the numerological associations. I do have to say that working with the deck alongside A Year in the Wildwood was a beautiful practice. I really enjoyed it. However, the deck does jump around. So it's not like going through a deck in order. So it was a little bit of a different experience for me because normally when I study a deck, I tend to study it more in order. But I wasn't necessarily so much studying the deck as I was also looking at the deck in association to seasonal energies, and that was really cool as well. I really do love this deck. I think it is a wonderful reader. The artwork is beautiful, right? That Will Worthington art. I would say that I know the Druidcraft is a great deck and it's a favorite. I actually like this one better. And now that I've done the whole study on it, I like it even more, right? It makes even more sense to me. But I think that is a lot due to the fact that I do read a little bit in my own way as in terms of, reading more elementally and numerologically, and the Druidcraft sticks way more to the Rider-Waite-Smith. Now, they're two different decks, and it's probably not really fair to compare them because they are different decks, they have different structures, they have different energy even. This is more in alignment with the type of energy and work that I like to do. And the artwork is just absolutely stunning. So I really enjoyed my year with the Wildwood. I know I meant to do videos about it throughout the year, but the year just got away from me and I was busy, I had a lot of stuff going on, and I just didn't end up having time to make a video. But I did enjoy the practice. For the most part, I stuck with it pretty well. I stuck with it better than I did my Thoth daily cards, which I think I did for the first few months of 2022, and then that completely dropped off for me, mostly just because I had already been studying the Thoth by the time I got into that, and then to do a card a day on top of that after I'd already done all that study just felt like a little much after a while, and I needed a break. I still do work with my Thoth Tarot, it's just not a deck that I currently am studying or working with regularly. But I really did enjoy a year with the Wildwood. It was a wonderful experience. If this is a deck that you are interested in, I highly recommend doing the year with it. It's really beautiful practice. It really does help you dive deeper into the cards, help you understand the structure and the system that is inherent in this deck. Now, I did work with this with the guidebook. I didn't pull the guidebook out because there is more information in the guidebook about the individual cards as well. I just didn't get that out because, like, we all know it has a guidebook, right? So that was my first memorable deck, the year that I spent with the Wildwood. So besides starting out the year with the Wildwood, I really don't have any particular order to the rest of these. We're going to take a look at some decks that are just like decks singly that stood out, and then some pairings that really stood out to me and were very memorable throughout the year. Let's start with the She Wolfe Tarot. This was a deck that I'd gone back and forth about whether or not I was going to get, and then I was able to pick up this copy from Stephanie over at Lumeria Star after watching her video on it, because I kept going back and forth. I really like the artwork in it. I just wasn't sure if it was going to be like a little too retro, a little too 70s for me, but honestly, like, I love it. And I really did end up kind of having a moment with this deck. And I say a moment, but it really lasted longer than a moment. This kind of became a deck that I used whenever I needed to kind of tap into my own personal power. It works wonderfully creatively for me as well, but that's not the only way in which I used it. It was just anytime I felt like I needed to access my own inner power, or I felt like I was, being maybe walked all over, this was a great deck that I turned to kind of help me step back into myself. It's very raw, it's very feminine, and it feels very much like a deck that channels divine feminine energy in a very powerful and blunt sort of way, which I really appreciate. Like, when I need no nonsense, this is the deck that I come to. But like, as you can see here in the 10 of Cups, like, there's some very beautiful, soft, nurturing cards in here as well. And it's really wonderful to see how it blends those two ideas very seamlessly, in my opinion. It's also slightly Thoth-based. I know a lot of people say this is a Thoth-based deck. I would say it's a Thoth-influenced deck, but that's just my personal interpretation of it, because I think some of the cards do lean a little bit more into the Rider-Waite-Smith, but I do like that it's kind of that hybrid. I also really love the artwork. There's something about this digital collage artwork that's done so beautifully, so minimalistically, that really does appeal to me. I feel like I can dive into these images, but I'm not overwhelmed by them. And so this was a deck that I kind of had a moment with, in the sense that I had a moment when I first got it, right? And I spent a lot of time working with it and getting to know it, but I've continued my work with it, and I've continued to access it as a portal into personal power. And I think it works really beautifully for that. So it's kind of earned its place in my memorable decks for allowing me to access that kind of energy and being that support system for me for that. This is also a beautiful pink gilded deck, which I don't usually like gilding, but I do like it on this deck. And here's the beautiful backs. It comes with a lovely guidebook in a beautiful box, and that is the She Wolfe Tarot. So the next deck that I kind of had a moment with in 2022 is the Margaret Peterson Tarot. Now, this is a funny one because I had the gray bordered edition of this deck, and it just, I don't know, it felt really flat for me. I didn't really care for it. Like, I mean, it's beautiful and the guidebook is lovely. The guidebook is actually really, really good. I don't mean it's like lovely, like it's not good, right? It's beautiful. But I just, with those gray borders, I just could not connect to it, which is so funny because like my house is gray. So I don't know what it was about that deck, but when I got it in the maroon borders, something just kind of like clicked for me. Suddenly this deck felt approachable. It felt like I understood where it was trying to take me. I was open to letting it take me on that journey. And I've used this deck since then for quite a few different readings. I've used it for creative work. I've used it for emotional landscape reading. I've used it for kind of bigger picture energetic readings. I've used it for comfort readings. Sometimes I just shuffle and pull a card. Look at the imagery, the artwork, and then read the message in the guidebook. It works beautifully for that. I have paired it with some tarot decks. I love this image. And it's just been a really wonderful experience. This was a deck that I had in a different configuration and then, you know, came back into my collection dressed up in these beautiful burgundy borders. And for whatever reason, that just worked for me. That was the thing that made it click. It felt warmer, it felt approachable. And maybe it just does come down to I was just in a space to be able to work with this deck at the time it came into my life in this configuration, whereas before, when I had it in the gray border, it was probably more a reflection of me and where I was in my life and not so much the deck itself. But when this one came into my life, I was ready for it. I was open to it. And I have had some really wonderful, profound readings with this deck. It's been a really beautiful part of my practice. It's a pretty versatile deck in the fact that I feel like I can use it for like creative work, emotional readings, energy readings, things like that. But because of the art style, I wouldn't qualify it as like an everyday type of a reader. This is a deck that I go to when I have very specific questions or very specific guidance that I'm looking for. There's a certain energy feel here that I think is what I'm drawn to when I want to work with this deck. The guidebook also adds a beautiful layer to working with the cards, and so I do get into that quite often, and I really enjoy working with it. So yeah, another beautiful addition to my collection that was here before, didn't connect, came back into my life, and here we are making a connection the second time around. So here's the beautiful backs on those. I do love that on this edition, the back is full borderless, so we don't have any of the white on there, which is wonderful. And again, that's a deck that I had before, but I just didn't connect with, and this year we had some memorable moments together. So the next two decks, actually, we're going to take a look at are out of print. There are timestamps in the description box below if you do not want to see out of print decks, but they were memorable decks in my practice in 2022. The first one here being the Heart of Faeries. This is kind of the deck that felt like it made fairy work or fae work approachable for me. I have the other Fairies Oracle, I think is what it's called, by Brian Froud, and this is the Heart of Faeries by Brian and Wendy Froud. And that deck has a totally different energy. So while I could tell you, right, it's okay, this is out of print, you could still get that, like, I don't feel that that's like entirely true because the decks do feel like they have completely different energies and they read completely different for me. So while I have done quite a bit of work with the Fairies Oracle, I had more profound insights and readings working with the Heart of Faeries. This deck to me felt like the deck that I needed to make the heart connection to that fae world. And I often pull these little fae for guidance. It's like when I don't know, there's a certain type of energy or thing that I'm feeling, and I feel like the fae that's the guidance that I need. So I will pull one of these, I will look at the artwork, I will get in the guidebook, see what the message is. Sometimes I will do additional readings with tarot around that. And sometimes I will simply just pull a fairy and that's my message for the day, or one of these fae creatures. This deck has a very heart-centered energy, I feel like, and I think that little bit earthier edge to the fae is what helps me connect to it personally, whereas the other Fairies Oracle by this creator, which is still readily available, so I definitely don't want to discourage anyone from getting it. It's a beautiful deck. It's just not the one of the two that I had the most memorable moments with. That one to me feels a little bit more like in the fae realm, in the spiritual, like in this whole other plane of existence that I struggle to actually connect with. And so the Heart of Faeries felt like the bridge between the two for me. It's still in the Fae realm, but it kind of is the Fae realm grounded a little bit more in that earthy energy, into that heart space energy, and that allowed me to make a connection. I just needed the Fae to kind of like reach a hand out and help me step into their world, and I feel like this deck did that beautifully. I paired it with a lot of really wonderful other Fae decks, and it reads so beautifully. I love to combine this with the next deck that we're going to take a look at and get kind of that two voices type of an energy, and then pull tarot around that. Those have been really, really powerful readings for me, and I've gained a lot of clarity and wisdom working with these little Fae. And sometimes they're just my guide for a day or a time period, and we just hang out together and they tell me what I need to know and point me in the right direction, but they do so, you know, speaking to me in a language that I can actually understand. Whereas sometimes I feel like the Fairies Oracle actually speaks over my head and I don't understand it. I have edged mine in copper as well to match the back. So that again is another really beautiful oracle deck that I had a lot of memorable readings with, and it's been really fun to get to know these fairies, but I'll definitely be continuing to work with them. So the other deck that I mentioned is the Tree Whisper Oracle. I believe this is the Secret Garden edition. Here's the beautiful backs. Again, I apologize because this one is also out of print as well. And I know I've talked about this deck a lot on my channel, which should tell you how memorable my experiences have been in my work with this deck. But I do really enjoy pulling a card from the Heart of Faeries along with one of the Tree Whisper cards to gain a message, and then I'll sometimes pull tarot around it to expand upon that message. This deck has been really interesting. I love the kind of tree spirit energy of it. We see faces in the trees. Like, it has that beautiful ancestral grandmother, really rooted into the earth energy for me. I get a lot out of working with this deck. I feel like it has a really great energy. It tells me exactly what I need to hear. It's very balanced. It doesn't swing one way or the other. It's not super light. It's not super shadow. It walks that beautifully liminal space between the two. But it's so grounded and rooted into the everyday and into the earth energy that it works beautifully for me. It's almost a deck that kind of takes that spirit energy, that liminal spirit energy, as I talked about with the Fae, and brings it down into the world into a way that I can understand. And apparently I need decks to hold my hand when I'm trying to access other realms or other energetic planes, perhaps. Help me step into that space. And this, along with the Heart of Faeries, is another one that, you know, works really beautifully for helping me to access that. They kind of work like portals in that way, where they're giving me the assistance I need to tap into that energy. I have edged mine in green. You can usually tell when I really, really love a deck because it ends up edged and in a bag most of the time, unless it comes in a super nice box. But anyway, yeah, this has been a really beautiful deck that I've worked with a lot this year and will continue to work with in 2023, I'm sure. So another deck that I've had some really profound moments with is the Pythonic Tarot. Here's the beautiful backs. Again, I have edged it in black and made a bag. Do you see a pattern here? The Pythonic Tarot is actually fairly new to my collection. So like, it's not one that I've used a lot this year. It's not one of my most used decks by any stretch of the imagination, but I have been using it a lot lately. I have been using it primarily with my work with the Dark Mother, and some work of probably what other people would consider shadow work in a sense. And it's just been a really beautiful, powerful experience. I've definitely had some memorable moments and some memorable readings with this deck. I wish I wouldn't have waited so long to have it in my collection, because I had seen it around before. And I'll be perfectly honest, when I saw it around before, I was like, it's really young. Like the figures are really young, but in working with this deck, I've come to realize that while they may be depicted young, the energy is not young. The energy is timeless. This feels like a deck that traverses the Maiden Mother crone. It leans really heavy into the crone for me, but we do get those sort of influences of the Maiden and the Mother here as well. It just is a deck that so succinctly reflects my personal spiritual practice and the way that I tend to work with that kind of dark mother crone energy. I like the term dark mother because to me that traverses both. It's mother energy, but it's also that crone energy. And that's just kind of how I've combined them in, you know, my own personal vocabulary. And this deck just really beautifully, very succinctly captures that and reflects it back to me and allows me to dive deep into it. And it's just, I mean, the artwork is absolutely stunning. It is just the most beautiful tarot deck. I really, really enjoy working with it. I love the colors in it. The illustrations are gorgeous. And as far as being like a deck for my practice, it just has been a really, really powerful reader. And I'm really glad to have it. It's definitely one that I will be continuing to work with. But again, as far as being a memorable experience, yeah, I've had some really powerful, memorable readings working with the Dark Mother and using the Pythonic Tarot as my tool or my portal into that energy. So speaking of working with Dark Mother energy, we're going to kind of shift now and we're going to take a look at some kind of deck pairings really that have stood out for me. Now, all of these decks that I'm going to share from here on out, like they're all standout decks on their own. But what's been so memorable for me is working with them alongside other decks. So here's the beautiful backs for these. These two decks together, like, okay, so let's talk about these two decks individually really quick, even though, again, all of these decks I have talked about and you've seen on my channel. The Mysteries of the Black Madonna was very generously gifted to me, and I'm gonna be forever grateful because it's become a huge part of my personal spiritual practice. I have been working a lot with the Black Madonna, again, with that Dark Mother energy. And of course, the Somnia Tarot is actually one of my favorite decks. It has a very specific energy though, and it kind of has developed like into, it has a very specific job. I very rarely actually pulled this deck out for any other work outside of working with my Mysteries of the Black Madonna, because I kind of feel like this is the way she speaks to me. This is the deck through which she communicates. So we'll just do my typical 3-card flip through, although these are occasions and cases where these are not 3-card readings most of the time for me. I end up using the Black Madonna as my focal point, and then I will pull multiple cards from the Somnia Tarot to flesh out the message from the Black Madonna. So from the Sacred Hag of Holy Wells, she's talking to me of the 5 of Swords and the 9 of Swords. We have the Black Veil with the Tower and the Fool. Like, this is a rough pairing though. I do, when I want something a little bit softer, I have other decks that I will pair with the Black Madonna to kind of soften the energy up, because some days I am not in a space where I can be confronted with like this Judgment cardigan, which is still to this day haunts me from time to time. I'm not always in a space for this type of a reading. So this is a pairing that I have to be in the right frame of mind for. I have to be in the right space. I have to be feeling grounded and centered in myself to be able to work with these messages, because they are very powerful and they are often brutal. So this combination does not pull any punches for me. If I want a softer message working with the Black Madonna, I will just pair it with other tarot decks, because the minute I pair it with the Somnia Tarot, I know I'm going to get that kick in the butt reading, and I have to be in the right space to be able to be open and accepting of it, to where I feel like it does good and doesn't just put me in an uncomfortable emotional state. Hopefully that makes sense. But when I am open, when I am receptive, there has been so much powerful work that I have done with these two decks. I have worked through a lot of issues. I guess you could call that shadow work. I have discovered a lot of places where I had some issues that I was struggling with. And sometimes when I have an issue and I am looking for guidance on how to find my way out of that, this is a pairing I will go to, because I know that the Black Madonna is going to tell me exactly what I need to hear. And I do feel like she is speaking to me through the Somnia Tarot. And so in that way, and I think because of that reason, like I don't really use the Somnia Tarot for much else. It's a very rare occasion that I pull it out, because it kind of feels like it's the voice of the Black Madonna for me. And I really kind of don't want to taint that in a sense. And I have enough decks in my collection that like I don't need to, right? I have plenty of other decks I can choose. Although I do feel like the Somnia Tarot is very unique in my collection. I don't feel like I have another deck that is quite this haunting, quite this evocative. It's quiet and beautiful, but it's also like real harsh and in a good way. Like these are things that I need to know, but again, like I said, these are things that like I need to know, but I need to be in the right frame of mind to be accepting of it. So, and I feel like I really do get the great, beautiful, supportive energy that I need from the Black Madonna, but it's like that supportive energy, but like seriously, get your crap together, do the thing, right? And I love getting into the guidebook for the Mysteries of the Black Madonna, because it's just fantastic. So yeah, that's been another really, really powerful pairing for me. It's been one that I continue to use, and like I said, the Somnia Tarot and the Mysteries of the Black Madonna, they're kind of my main communication tools, if you will, for working with the Dark Mother energy, as well as just the Black Madonna personification in and of herself. So they've been really wonderful. I definitely will continue this pairing, but it's again been some very, very powerful, very enlightening readings with these two decks. So the next three decks are decks that we will have just seen. If you watched my latest DIY tarot spreads, I talked about how I use these three for a past, present, future expanded reading. That in itself has been a really wonderful experience, but I have used these three decks together, and sometimes I pull tarot decks in, sometimes I pull like the Stranger Things and things like that in here. But these three decks have been really powerful. I still really struggle with these boxes. So there's probably gonna be a bag in their future. The boxes look beautiful on the shelf, but they're kind of a pain to get in and out of. And when you work with a deck often, or two decks often in this case, that can be really challenging. And the Conjure card box, like it just flops open. So if you don't lay it flat like this, the cards will fall out. So like, I feel like they all need bags probably at some point. The Southern Gothic Oracle, I am just hoping and like sending out prayers and good wishes for the decorator and hoping that they create a tarot, because I would absolutely love a tarot in this same style. I have purchased the Haunts pack for the Southern Botanic or Southern Gothic, which is an expansion pack. So I have additional cards in here. This deck is such a straight shooter. I love it. It just like, it's one of those that is really no nonsense. And it just kind of delivers that, here's what you need to know. I love that it has the title and two keywords. I'm a real big fan of oracle decks with multiple keywords. Like if you're gonna do keywords, multiple keywords are fun. I think there's something really great about just like a single succinct keyword too. But it's kind of a novelty in my collection to have oracle decks that do have multiple keywords, because I feel like most of them have just one. And both the Southern Gothic and the Southern Botanical have multiple keywords. So again, similar to the Southern Gothic here, the Southern Botanical has a lot of really beautiful artwork. There are some botanicals in this too, so sometimes it's really interesting when I pull a botanical from the Southern Gothic and a botanical from this deck. I get lots of botanicals on the table, which can be really interesting. But this deck, I love that we have the title. There's also the plant name, which I mean, I'm gonna be honest, means absolutely nothing to me, but we also have the 2 keywords, so that's really fantastic. Depending on how I'm working with this, sometimes I tie into those keywords more than others. Sometimes I just let the artwork speak to me intuitively. I feel like this has a little bit softer energy than this. However, I do have the poison pack in here now, which was very generously gifted to me by one of my members. And that was kind of like, once I saw the poison pack, I had to get the haunts pack too, because I was like, oh, those are really great expansions. But I do feel like the botanicals, like it's a little bit softer. It's one that I tend to use for like coming into a reading and going out of the reading, because I feel like it has a great energy for that. It kind of tells me like what I'm sitting in and where I'm moving towards. And I think it works really well for that. Whereas the Southern Botanic or the Southern Gothic, I feel like is a little bit more, it has a great balance of light and shadow, but it's a little bit more blunt for me, honestly. Not near as blunt though as my Conjure cards. And this little deck has started like a whole thing for me. And I'll be talking about that more in an upcoming video. But this is playing cards, which is not a system that I'm super familiar with. I have edged mine because like, that's just fun. And this is like the straightest shooter of all. And this deck is, most of the time, it's super scary accurate. And I use this in a very predictive way. Like, I want to know what's going to happen if I don't change what I got going on, right? And this deck is scary accurate. It's scary accurate. And I've really, really enjoyed working with it. So it's been really interesting to pair these together. If you want to see, like, one of the main ways that I use this is that past, present, future reading, because I actually do those quite often. I will pull these 3 decks out also when, like, I have a question that needs answering, like, right now. This deck, even though, like, we're talking about future in that one reading, this deck to me isn't very far in the future. Like, what I've found is that it's the very near future. And so when I have questions about what's going on, like right here, right now, this is a wonderful combination to go to, because I use the Conjure cards to give me the, like, no nonsense, here's exactly what's going on and where you're headed. The Southern Gothic helps me kind of expand upon that, get a little bit deeper, see maybe where things are coming from or why it's happening. And then the Botanicals is helping me kind of look at, where do I kind of need to apply that, right? How can I apply that? And so they've been really, really fantastic readers for me in that sense. And they've been really versatile and also quite profound. Like, I would throw these up here with like my top decks of the year. However, I have not had them that long. So they're not the decks that I've used the most. We shall see when I do this video or these collection of sort of, you know, end of the year wrap ups, if these make the list for top readers for next year. We'll see how often I keep using them. But for right now, they're on my table quite often. So now let's talk about another fun pairing that I know I've shown on my channel because I kind of discovered it one month. So I know it was in a monthly wrap-up video, and that is the Alice the Wonderland Oracle, and this is my Cosmic Slumber Tarot. So honestly, like, both of these decks could be kind of considered like outsiders in my collection because I don't feel like I have a ton of decks that kind of sit in this energy. I do have one other Alice Tarot, but I don't think I have any other Alice decks. This is the one. I have one Tarot, one Oracle, and I really, really enjoy this deck. I think it's really, really cool. And I've been using these 2 decks. So I've talked a lot about the Cosmic Slumber lately as well, because I've shown it in a couple pairings, which has been really fun. These are 2 decks that I use quite a bit for dream work and also sort of energetic readings. So you know, it's great for when I'm trying to get at, like, I had a weird dream or whatever, and like I need to know what's going on. I'll pull an Alice in the Wonderland Oracle card, and I'll look at what the title is, the kind of phrases down here, and of course the imagery, and then I'll look to the tarot to provide a deeper message there to let me know kind of where that's showing up for me. And I've talked about that in my other video, that wrap-up video, and how I use it in that way. But another thing that I found that this deck has been really good for is kind of letting me know like where energy is flowing or blocked or things of that nature. It's like it's always tea time. So like it's eternity, endless moments, repetition. Like I feel like time is standing still maybe, or maybe the energy is stagnant. And then I can look to the tarot to see like where is that energy stagnant and how can I release that blockage. And sometimes it's telling me like, you know, maybe this in this instance, like she looks like she's almost overwhelmed. So where am I overwhelmed? How is that energy, you know, manifesting for me currently? And again, looking to the tarot to help me move that energy around. And it's been a really interesting one for that. I really like using these two decks together. I've found a couple of different ways that I definitely end up working with the Cosmic Slumber. The Alice the Wonderland Oracle, I think, has really only come out with this deck this year, but I've had some really interesting readings with these decks. The Alice the Wonderland Oracle really encourages me to look at things in a different light, which is really great, and I love that about it. The Cosmic Slumber is a really easy reader, but it feels like it has a lot of energy. It feels like there's a lot of movement. I do have the extra cards in here as well, which I don't normally keep in decks, but I have them in this one. And I feel like the decks together just do a great job of kind of either keying me into what's going on energetically, or if I'm using it specifically to dive deep into a particular dream, this is the two decks that I tend to go to for that as well. I don't do a ton of dream work, but occasionally I'll get reoccurring dreams, or I'll get dreams where I'm like, what the heck was that? And what did that mean? And so I'll go to these decks to help me kind of understand that. See, such a curious dream. Where do I need to understand that? The Three of Pentacles and Temperance. It's beautiful. So these two have been really cool in helping me to kind of understand different aspects of dream work, as well as, you know, looking at where energy's moving and how I can access that and maybe move it around or shift it, or what I need to know about it. And that's been really cool. It's been some really interesting readings with these two. Let's go to another trio, actually, this time, that I know I've shown on my channel because I think I did a whole video, or I at least mentioned it in my monthlies, and it is the Tower of Curious Creatures. Then I have the Zombie Oracle, or the Zombie Tarot, and the Housewives Tarot. I have talked about how I use these three decks together in other videos. Like, the backs are kind of cute too, but I like to use the Tarot of Curious Creatures for various sort of fun kind of readings, and it just kind of gives me like the lighter side of things. I think I was doing it this way actually, but like it doesn't really matter. I did a video on it. These three decks together are really fantastic about like looking at like what's seriously going on like in the mundane, like what's going on right this 5 minutes. We've got the 10 of Wands, and then I'm looking at what the shadow energy is of that using the Zombie Tarot, and the lighter side, or kind of like stop taking yourself so seriously energy with the Tarot of Curious Creatures on the other side. And like it works really, really well. I still to this day use this combination, particularly when I'm feeling like a little disenchanted with things. And sometimes when I just want to like look at a situation and go, okay, here's what's going on. And maybe I need to like really take a look at what is going on beneath, and what's going on like that maybe I'm not acknowledging, right? So what's the shadow and the light in a sense? But in this configuration, we're not so much as looking at shadow and light as kind of like, here's the don't take yourself so seriously side of things, which I really love. I mean, I do get really, you know, really important messages from this little trio here, this little deck family. But oftentimes what I find is that it's like, seriously, get out of your own head. Things are never as bad as you think they are, right? And this deck, or these three decks, are really great at calling me out on that, to let me know that like it's not really as bad as you think it is, right? Yes, there's always stuff going on beneath the surface, and yes, there's a way to look at the light side of it as well, but there's such a levity and kind of almost exaggeration to these 3 decks that does really help me like get out of my own head, get out of my own way. When I'm feeling like really in that space of like, I just cannot see the forest for the trees, I love coming to these 3 decks because like it pulls me right out of the forest and is like, all right, here you go. Like seriously, the forest is not coming down around you. Stop being Chicken Little. It'll be all right. You know, I think I've mentioned all these decks individually. Like the Tarot of Curious Creatures is like, it's definitely an outsider in my collection. Like I feel like it doesn't really belong here, but I love it. And in that sense, it does really belong here because like I really do have a connection to this deck and I think it's fantastic and I love working with it. It sits in my, you know, not my favorites basket because it just literally won't fit, but it's favorites basket adjacent. It's sitting right next to it, so it's always at hand. It's a really, really fantastic one for that kind of work. I do really like the Housewives Tarot. It's very fun, it's very cheeky, but it's also very practical. And I find that like kind of like the Conjure cards, it's pretty dang accurate. And it's really great at taking a look at what is actually going on in the situation. And like I said, it kind of takes it a little bit to the absurd. Like it's what's going on in the situation, but like seriously, stop taking yourself so seriously, right? It's never that bad. Things are never as bad as they seem most of the time. I'm just exaggerating crap in my head. And then my Zombies Tarot. I mean, I love my Zombies Tarot. This used to be a deck that I just like only brought out during spooky season. But this year, I've really brought this deck out quite a bit throughout the later half of the year. And it just reads so beautifully for so many different things. I love working with this deck. I love its quirky nature. I love its sense of humor. It does have a lot of shadow energy, but there's also like some levity here. There's some, I wouldn't say light, but it takes a little bit of a different look at things. Like, yeah, it's shadow, but it's like shadow in a sense of, is that really what's going on? Maybe you might want to look again, which is really cool. So definitely 3 decks that I really have enjoyed working with this year that I've for sure had some memorable moments with. So last but certainly not least of decks that I've had memorable moments with is the Villains Tarot deck and the Blessed Be Oracle. So I feel like I have shown this Disney Villains deck like so much on my channel. Like I'm having a full on like love affair with this deck. I have not put it down since I got it. I use it all the time. I use it for all kinds of things. It is a super solid reader. I've talked about it in several videos now, and it's just like, man, this deck makes me happy, but it also reads really, really well. I use it for all kinds of things. I did finally edge mine in a dark purple to match, which I think is really fun. And I do use it alongside the Blessed Be cards. And this is a deck that I talked about when I did the pairings video featuring these, that I really didn't think I would use for anything beyond like sort of blessing or altar cards. But actually I found that pairing it with the villains like makes this beautiful like blessing and a curse reading, which is super fun. I'll just show you that real quick, even though like if you've seen that pairing video or the other videos where I've talked about these decks, like I apologize for repeating myself, but it's a really cool reading and a really cool energy that I've been enjoying like a lot. And it's definitely created some memorable moments. For one, like if I had to pick one deck that I think was the most standout and surprised me the most this year, it's the Disney Villains, because I bought that deck entirely sight unseen. I wasn't planning on getting it at all. I just assumed it was going to be the same old, you know, sort of lazy pip thing going on that had been, that we had seen from this particular publisher. And so I didn't watch any videos or anything about it. I was just like, oh, it's fine. Like, I like the villains. I really do like, you know, it's not cool to say you like Disney, but I do really like Disney. I grew up on Disney movies. My kids grew up on Disney movies. I will always have a soft spot for that. A little bit of sentimental attachment to it. But I just, one day I was playing Disney Dreamlight Valley, and I know I've told the story before, but I was like, I'm just gonna get it, because if nothing else, like, it'll be fun to play with while I'm playing my video game, right? And I got it, and I was flipping through it with my members for the first time, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is like a legit tarot deck. It makes sense to me. All of these cards make sense to me. All of these cards, I think, reflect the energy beautifully. I feel like whoever made this deck actually knows what they're talking about in terms of tarot. The artwork is beautiful. Like, it's so clicked for me. Part of that is, yes, nostalgia, Disney, all of that. My childhood, my kids' childhood, like, let's be honest, that's all wrapped in there. So I have a lot of emotional attachment to this deck as well. And like, that's totally a thing, but it also reads really beautifully for me. And I started using it for all kinds of things. Then I started playing with it every single day, and I started doing readings with it. I still use it when I play Disney Dreamlight Valley. I pull cards for fun. It's nothing serious, but I pull cards for fun, and it's a great practice. But I do use this deck for very serious readings too. I use this kind of like I like to use the last three we just looked at, where I'm kind of looking at, okay, maybe things aren't, maybe there's something going on that's not quite what I would like it to be in this situation. And so I'll pull out these two decks together and do a reading, which I've kind of just named my Blessing and a Curse reading, because I get kind of that, here's what's going on in the situation. It's not always necessarily like a curse, right? It's not always necessarily a super bad thing, but like, here's what's going on in the situation, and then here's a blessing to help you through it. And it works really beautifully. So I really love these two decks together. The Disney Villains is like, I would consider it one of my most used decks of 2022, except for the fact that I've only had it for just a few months. So there are definitely other decks that I have used more, but it is probably the number one standout deck in my collection. And that could be partially because, like, it surprised me. I wasn't expecting to like it. I wasn't expecting it. Like, let's be honest, I wasn't expecting it to actually read well for me. I wasn't expecting it to be a deck that I could use like an all-around raider. This is like one of my favorite Hierophant cards now. It surprised me. It did. And like, it's probably forever gonna be like the ultimate good mood deck in my collection. And like, I just can't imagine. I mean, maybe I will get tired of it at some point, but like, I bought toys to go with it. Like, I set intention when I work with this deck. Like, I treat it like a serious tarot deck a lot of the time. And then sometimes like, I just shuffle and pull a card when I'm working, you know, when I'm playing with my Disney Dreamlight Valley, and I'm like farming pumpkins, man. Like, it works beautiful for both. Those, I think, are probably the most fun, as well as like the most surprising decks, and memorable for sure in that way, that I got to experience in 2022. So there we have it. That is a look at the, I don't even know how many decks that I had really memorable experiences with. Of course, this is not all of them, but the decks that I shared with you today are all decks that like I refer to as I had a moment with them. They made an impact and an impression on me. A lot of these are decks that will continue to be very valuable parts of my collection and that I will continue to work with into the next year. Some of them were just experiences like the Wildwood, where I worked with it through a particular practice, and now that that practice has come to an end, I'll move on to something else, but it was definitely a memorable experience. So I hope you enjoyed that look at my most memorable decks of 2022. If you're looking for my top 10 decks, that's coming up next, so stay tuned. In the meantime, you'll find links for everything that I've shown here in the description box below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.